Hey there, friends. My name is Jeff Fritz, and I want to talk to you today about Blazor. Now, what is Blazor besides a magical purple jacket? Um, Blazor is a new user interface framework from the .NET team that allows you to compose and build front ends to your applications with C#, HTML, and Razor templates. You're going to be able to build using components and compose those into pages that you can then use inside of your applications, whether they run on a server or directly on a client. In this series of videos, we're going to introduce you to all kinds of features about Blazor that are going to get you interested, excited, and hopefully inspired to build your first Blazor application. Now, Blazor is completely open source and free for anybody to develop with. You can find all the tools you need at blazor.net. And all the source code is available free online at github.com/.net/ASP.NET Core. Okay, now that we know what Blazor is, let's build our first application with Blazor. That means we need to get our hands on some tools so that we can be up and running on our developer workstation with command line capabilities, editor capabilities, and compilation capabilities to build a Blazor application. So in this video, let's take a few minutes and acquire and install those tools to get us started building with Blazor. And then let's build our first application and take a look around. Let's take the nickel tour and see what's involved and what we have at our disposal in those first templates that arrive with Blazor. All right, let's get started downloading everything we need and building our first Blazor application. I've navigated to blazor.net and it's redirected me to this site. This is the Blazor homepage, and it's got all kinds of information here about all the features of the framework, those manager specific and marketing features that you always have people asking about. Really cool things that we'll eventually get into and we'll eventually showcase here on these videos. But for now, let's go back up to the top and let's get started with Blazor. We'll click the Get Started button to head off and start building our first Blazor app. And the first thing that it has us do is download and install the Software Development Kit, or the .NET SDK. This website will detect exactly what version you need and make it available for you to install just behind this button. I'll click it, save the file. Your file version, your file name may be a little bit different from mine as I'm installing this, as the .NET 5 version is the current version that I'm going to download and install. I'll save that and take some time to install that file. It's very easy to do, to install and have it available then on the command line for us to work with. After installing the SDK, and I'm here on Windows, so I can use all the tools, all the Visual Studio 2019 and later tools that are available to me. But the heart of the .NET and the Blazor experience is running at the command line. So let's make sure everything is installed correctly. I'm going to go to the command prompt and run the .NET command and make sure that I have that version available to me. So I'll go over to Windows Terminal and run .NET version, and I can tell this is version 50400 with some preview bits tacked onto the end to make sure that things are testing and working properly. Okay, I will next make sure that I can build my first Blazor application with the new Blazor templates that are available to us. So I will execute .NET new, and we're going to be particularly looking at these two templates right here, Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly. Let's start off building our first Blazor Server application. And we can take a look at exactly how a Blazor application runs. At the command line, I'll execute these commands, but these run the same on Windows, Mac, and Linux. .NET New, Blazor Server, and I'll call this my first Blazor app. And now I'll open that application using Visual Studio 2019. Here I am inside my application, and it almost looks like an ASP.NET Core application. I see a program and a startup file there in my Solution Explorer. I see a folder with pages, another folder with data, a www root folder. Well, that sure looks like exactly the same purpose that I have in an ASP.NET Core project. In fact, if I look in the www root folder, it looks like the exact same types of static content, CSS files, icons. These are things that are typical in a web page that are static content. They're going to be handed off to the browser to be rendered. But when I look at index.razor, it's got this @page element up at the top and a survey prompt in purple text. That's not the typical formatting that I'm used to seeing inside of my ASP.NET application or my Razor templates. And it also has a .razor file name. That's interesting. Okay. Let's try running this application and seeing what it looks like. I have this Hello World application, and I'm greeted with Welcome to your new app, with a navigation menu down the side that tells me how I can go into a counter demo and a fetch data demo. All right, that makes sense. But this block right here, how is Blazor working for you? I didn't see that inside of my index.razor file. Let me go back there. Let's take a look at that and see if we can understand a little more what's going on here. Inside Visual Studio, I can see the directive on line 1 says @page, and it provides a reference to /. That's a route being defined, and it's telling the Blazor runtime that this Razor file, index.razor, should handle requests that come to the root, the / address of our website. And the survey prompt on line 7, that's actually referring to another component that's built inside of our application that's named survey prompt. And it's passing in a parameter called title with the text, how is Blazor working for you? If we take a look in the shared folder, we'll see the survey prompt Razor file. That's another component being referenced by this page. Because it has the name survey prompt, we can reference it and use it as a component inside of other .razor files. And these Razor templates are made up of this mix of HTML, C#, and references to other components. Our survey prompt file is made up of 2 halves. Lines 1 through 10 are HTML that looks a lot like the Razor templates we're used to seeing inside of ASP.NET MVC, with a reference to a title property on line 3, and a block of C# code defined on lines 12 through 16 that define that title property and decorate it with the parameter attribute. This component is being referenced and is what is being used to be inserted inside of our index file there on line 7. The collection of Razor templating, pages, and components all working together are what make Blazor so interesting and compelling for us to work on, because as we're going to see in our upcoming videos, all of these tools make it very easy for us to write C# code to deliver amazing user interfaces for folks to build and work with our applications. All of our files in a Blazor project that have the .razor extension are components. Now, some of those components we can reach by navigating to an address in our browser. Some of those we can reuse inside of other pages and components so that we can access them, we can reuse their content. let's take a look at what we can do with components, how we turn them into pages in this video, and how we can pass a parameter into our components so they become a little bit more like an HTML tag or a directive, as we refer to them sometimes when we're building with those various web development frameworks. Here we are inside of our first Blazor app. This is the result of the default template for a Blazor server application. And I'm looking at the index razor file. We see what looks like a pretty standard razor template. Hello world, welcome to your new app. How is Blazor working for you? Wait a sec. The survey prompt tag that we see there, that's not an HTML tag. That's not a directive that I'm familiar with. Where does that come from? That's a component. It's highlighted in bold purple here inside of Visual Studio, and I can see on the left side inside of Solution Explorer there is a survey prompt razor file. In our Blazor applications, any file that ends with a .razor file extension is a component that can optionally be referenced inside of another component. So if we look at survey prompt razor, there's the content of our survey prompt element that'll be rendered where we saw the survey prompt tag here on line 7. So we can reuse some of the other content that's shown here with .razor files that we find in our Solution Explorer. Let's run this application and tinker with some of these and see what else we can reuse as a component inside of our index page. So there's my application running on the right side in Microsoft Edge. And over here on the left I have Visual Studio, and I can start tinkering with that index page and see what exactly lights up when I reference various components using their file name as a tag inside my index page. So let's try adding a counter. And I'll save that. On the right side, my browser will refresh, and now the counter page is embedded inside of my index over on the right side. That's interesting. Okay, I can even put the fetch data element in here, and we'll get the fetch data page output inside of my browser there on the right side. Now, in this case, these aren't very valid samples. They aren't something that I really want to embed inside of my index page on the right. But we can do some things to make it a little bit more interesting and reuse and show off some of these features. Let's start with taking a look at that title attribute that we see on the survey prompt. That's a title that's being passed in. It's some text that's being submitted into the survey prompt component and being rendered inside of our index page on the right side in the middle of that div that shows how is Blazor working for you. Okay, maybe we can add an attribute to our counter that allows me to change the incrementing count of the counter there. So instead of it incrementing by ones, we can increment by some other value. How do we do that? How do we start passing that information into our page and into our counter.razor component? So I'm going to go over to counter.razor, and here in this code block that defines the code that's being executed for the counter, and we can see here there's an on-click event handler that is calling increment count. And that increment count is right here. It increments a current count field right here that's being output right there inside of the current count paragraph. So if I want to add an attribute that's going to change this from incrementing by 1 here to increment by some other value, we can add a property, a public property, called increment by, and I'll set a default value of 1 to that, and I'll update my method here to plus equals increment by. we'll use that increment operator to increment and assign by the increment by value, which for right now is defaulting to the value 1. Okay. I want to make that property something that can be assigned, something that's being passed in from my index page. So to do that, to complete the cycle here, I just decorate this with the attribute parameter. And that will make increment by a parameter that can be specified inside of other components, inside of pages that we want to control how the counter behaves. So I'll save the counter here, and it's going to refresh on the right side, and it still increments by 1 because that's the default value being assigned to the increment by property right here. I'll go up to index, and now inside of my counter element, I'll add a space and start typing increment by, and you see Visual Studio is giving me some help. It's telling me there's an increment by attribute here that you can assign. And if you look closely there, you'll see it's got the little @ sign next to increment by. It's telling us that this is a C# attribute that we're specifying, and we're passing a value into our component. So I'll specify increment by 5, save that. It's going to refresh my application, and now when I click the button, it increments by 5s. If I go over to the counter page where I have just the counter element appearing here, I'll click and it still increments just by 1s because that increment by property is not being assigned a different value. So I can control the behavior 2 different ways by interacting with this parameter, by setting it and consuming it appropriately in different locations. This gives us a way now that we can interact with components, reuse them, take them from more than just a page or the only entry on a page, and reuse them in multiple places throughout our Blazor application. I hope you stick around for our next video. We're going to talk about now how we can do more with the pages inside of Blazor, how we can take them and start to define how we receive and control what URL they're listening to and the layout that they're behaving inside of, the layout that they're presented inside of. Thanks so much. It's Jeff Fritz here, and I want to talk to you today about Blazor Pages. Now, we previously saw a bit about components and how every .razor file inside of a Blazor project is a component. It can be reused inside of other .razor files. Well, this time we're going to take a look at how we can make those files into pages. The exact same syntax, exact same behavior, but we're going to add the @page directive at the top of the Razor file, and it will be addressable. We'll be able to navigate to that location, and it will respond as a page inside of our application. And that little bit of routing that we're doing so that it specifies exactly where the URL is going to deliver us into those pages, we can tune and use that in order to set various parameters based on the folder structure of that page directive we're going to define. Finally, let's also take a look at what happens to that page when we want to apply a layout, a shared layout that all of our pages should consume and abide by. How do we tune that? How do we add features to that? And how do we create more layouts that we can choose between based on what pages we're navigating to? Come on, let's head over to the screens and take a look at how we can work with pages and layouts. Here we are back in our startup application that we've been building through these series of videos, and I want to start talking about referencing those pages. And we see at the top of this page, on line 1, the index is defined as a page because it has the @page directive, and it's indicating that it answers on the /URL. At the root of our website, the home page is where we'll find this content being rendered, and sure enough, we see that in Microsoft Edge on the right side of the screen. Okay, makes sense. I can understand that. Let me now show you the counter page. And we see the counter page answers on the counter address specified there on line 1. Okay, makes sense. And this is the way that we can specify routing for all of our pages that we want to be interacted with from Blazor. If you can navigate to a page, it has this line defined in it. In fact, you can provide multiple page directives so that you can navigate to that page using different names and different URLs and still getting the same great content. So I can click on the counter here on the right and I get counter. I can also add to the top here at page do the stuff. I'll save that. I'll wait for my browser to refresh on the right side. And if I change that address from not just counter to do the stuff, I get the same page. I can navigate back and forth and still get to do the stuff brings me to counter. Okay, so I can provide alternate names for the same page, and Blazor knows how to handle that and route me appropriately to those pages. What if somebody tries to navigate to a page that doesn't exist? Well, if I were to go to just do, it comes back and says, sorry, there's nothing at this address. How does Blazor know how to do that? Where's that information coming from? Well, over here in our Blazor application, there is app.razor. When we click that open, we'll see there is a router that's defined for our application, and it specifies exactly where to find all the Razor components for this application. And it will indicate up here on the first line that it prefers exact matches. It wants the exact matching address inside that URL bar. And it also wants to find exactly the location, the name of that component inside of the various assemblies that it may look at. Now we see right at the top that it's going to look at the app assembly of the current assembly that our application is running in. Our program class lives in this project, so it's going to go look inside this assembly to find matching components, matching pages. If it's found one and it's going to pass along the route data, it routes the view as we see on line 3, and we've got a default layout specified as well. And you see it's called main layout. And Visual Studio is helping us out there by saying that it's actually first Blazor app.shared.main layout. More on that in a second. But if we don't find a matching page, this element down here between lines 5 and 9 is executed and presented. It shows a layout view with a specified layout being forced, and we're specifying that layout of main layout again with that, sorry, there's nothing at this address message. So what we've learned here is we can change the layout and we can change the content of this error message to say whatever we'd like just by changing this content here. And if I save and update that, my content, when the page isn't found, is updated inside the browser. Okay, I can control that. I can change my layout and I can interact with it. What's a layout? What does that mean? I remember layouts from ASP.NET, MVC, and how we used Razor over there. Is that a similar concept? Yes, it is. If we go over here and we look in the shared folder of our application, there we see main layout.razor. And if we open that, you see it has div class page, and the sidebar is defined with the navigation menu component called out. And I know it's the navigation menu component because it's highlighted in that bold purple text. I see the main element that's on the right side of the page that includes a link up at the top. And if I scroll over, you can see this is the About link that appears right here on the page. Finally, there's this at body indicator right here on line 14. This is telling Blazor this is where I want the contents of my pages to be written. put all that for a page right here inside of this div. Makes sense. I can understand that. So our layouts can be specified and we can put this together very easily and share it throughout our application and create multiple layouts if we'd like. We can even have layouts inherit and be nested inside of other layouts. Let's also take a look at where the HTML tags that make up a page come from. And in this application, if we take a look in Pages, we have host CSHTML. This is the Razor template that's used inside of a Blazor server application to give us the rich HTML information, including all of our CSS style sheets, our location for where the Blazor application is going to be rendered, right here where it says component, and information about error handling user interface. Finally, a script that's going to start up the Blazor server. So we have the format of our page defined here in the host, all the web stuff that we need to bootstrap and run our server. Let's go back to counter for a second. And we saw how we can have multiple page indicators up here at the top, specifying where to listen to get that counter page to appear. I can also add routing information to that page directive so I can specify additional parameters that I may want to capture from the address bar to pass into my Blazor components. Consider, what if we want to have a different starting value for this counter? Well, I can also specify a starting value as a route element like this. And I can pass that into a parameter by specifying another property down here in the code block. Easy enough. I'll save that and let my page refresh. And right now it looks the same. We haven't seen any change, but let's start off with that current count having the same value as the starting value that's being passed in. I'll add one method to set that current count appropriately from the starting value. And my application refreshes, and the current count starts at 0. I haven't specified a value to pass in. Now, in order for me to make sure that a starting value is an integer, is a numeric value that the router is going to pass correctly into my property, I need to add a route constraint to that page directive on line 2. So I'll just put a :int there to specify that this is expecting a number that we're going to pass along into that starting value parameter, and it's going to be maintained as an integer. So I'll just change my location here, and I'll navigate to /5, and my counter starts at 5. I can click through, and it behaves just fine, just the way that we expected it to. And if I go back to the home page, my counter there still functions the same way that we had it run before. If I want to change the layout for one page alone, if I want to go to my counter page here and change the layout for this page, I can use a layout directive here and specify a new name for our layout that we want to display with this page alone. Easy enough. There is so much that we can do with this. This is just the tip of the iceberg for us to use different layouts, set up our pages so it responds and interacts in different ways. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you tune in for our next video in the series where we're going to be talking about binding data with Blazor. Jeff Fritz here, and I want to talk to you more about Blazor. This time, let's talk about binding data to our various HTML elements. Now, if I've got some content that I want to put into an HTML text input, or I want to bind a checkbox and connect that up to some .NET code, how do I do that? In this video, we're going to take a look at the @bind keyword and how we can use that to connect our C# variables and content up to our HTML elements so that they behave and interact with each other in a complementary way. We saw this previously with binding inside of our counter component. This time, we're going to take a look at binding and interacting with other things besides just a text box or some HTML content that's on page. We're going to bind to a checkbox, and we're going to see how we can also interact with the various events that occur not just on click or on change, and we're going to see how that affects our bindings with our C# code. Let's head over to the code and take a look. All right, let's take a look at how we can bind data now with some input elements. And we're going to continue with the samples from getting started in the Microsoft documentation. We're going to follow in the to-do sample that's included. And here's our to-do Razor page. We've extended it slightly to add a due date for our to-do list. When we take a look at the to-do sample, we've got a text box here that we can fill in, and it will automatically, when we click Save, add and create a to-do list here on this page. And I can add, learn about Blazor. Okay, and it just builds out a very simple to-do list. Now, I've added another section here that will actually reflect the information for the to-do about to be created below the Save button. So as I type in information here, the bind operator that's occurring here, the bind operation that we see right here, binding to the new to-do field right here, this string field, will take the contents of that field and set up a two-way binding. Information that's keyed into that input is copied into the new to-do field on line 25. And when the new to-do field is changed, it will update the contents of the text box. So when that Save button is clicked, it resets the new to-do field to empty, which updates the contents of the text box to empty. Okay, that makes sense. Now, I can also modify the interactions with that text box so that it doesn't just update the contents of the field when we finish and we tab out of the text box. So when I tab, it updates. I can change that instead so that it updates on other events by creating and using the bind event argument. So I'll go back into the code over here, and normally when you bind, it's going to bind to the onChange event after the field has been changed. Okay, we can change that to other events that are known and available to us inside of our text boxes and other input elements. I can change this instead to bind on the onInput event. Save that. I'll wait for my page to refresh, and I can start keying in information in the text box that will automatically get updated as I type. Let me show you. It's automatically updating and setting the value of that field as I type. And if I go and type some more, it updates automatically. Really cool way for you to take control of how the interactions are taking place. The event on the input element that triggers that bind operation, when it should actually fire and interact with your C# code. Another interaction that I can use here is on things like a date field. I can specify the format of the data that I'm receiving. So I can include here not just I want to bind to a due date for this to-do item, but I can specify the format that I want it to adhere to. So let's have it bind to the format year, month, day. And I'll save that. It'll refresh my browser, and I'll start keying in my to-do item here, learn some C#, and I'll place a due date of 2021-06-30. And when I tab out of that, you see it bound to the due date field there on line 27. And that value was presented inside my paragraph. Learn some C#, due, and it reformatted using the short date string to June 30, 2021. Real easy to see how that works and how we can kind of force that interaction between our input elements and the code that we're writing in C#. There's a number of other ways that you can control your formatting. You can bind to various different events so that as you interact with fields, as folks tab in and out of those fields, or they start keying in, key press, key up, you can actually trigger those bind operations appropriately and as needed for your application. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and you stick around for our next Blazor video. Jeff Fritz here, and I've got some more great Blazor content for you. This time, let's talk about getting data into our Blazor application from a microservice, from some sort of HTTP endpoint that lives outside of our application. Maybe it's a cloud service like Azure Search or Azure Functions that we're going to query, interact with. Maybe we send data back into and have Blazor respond appropriately. How do we do that? Well, fortunately, there's a really great sample that's embedded inside the Blazor templates, and it's the Fetch Data page. This is a very simple page that's been built that also showcases a very important concept, the concept of dependency injection. We're going to see how we can inject an HTTP client that will allow us to fetch and interact with data from those services outside of our Blazor application. Let's go over and take a look a little bit deeper at the fetch data sample and extend it a little bit so that we can do some other interactions with our data. All right, let's take a look at the fetch data sample that comes with our Blazor templates. This is available with every template, whether it's WebAssembly or Blazor Server. And the features that you see here are the same in both environments. The code on the right, it's presenting, and you see in the browser, it is presenting a nice table of some some randomly generated weather forecast. It's a table, but it's been built from data fetched from the server. Take a look at the code here on the left inside of Visual Studio, and you can see it's injecting a weather forecast service object. Now that's interesting. That's something that we haven't seen before. This is dependency injection, and we've had the ability to use the inject keyword inside of Razor templates previously, but now we're using it inside of a Blazor page or a Blazor component to inject dependent features and services that we want to use inside of our page. If we scroll down inside of our page here, you'll see it uses the weather forecast service to get a forecast asynchronously for a specific time. Show me the forecast for the next 5 days. And that's what it's doing right there. It's able to reach into that weather forecast service because it's been injected into our component. The code for it isn't here. It's elsewhere in our application. And in this template, using the Blazor server-side template inside my startup class. Just like in a regular ASP.NET Core application, I have a configure services method, and there you see it's added a singleton for the weather forecast service. And the weather forecast service is just simply returning a collection of these faux forecasts that are going to be painted on the screen. That's easy to do. That's easy to interact with, to get data and have it loaded into our application. We've got a clear service that is going to work for us here inside of our Blazor server-side application. But when I'm running Blazor with WebAssembly, I need to fetch data from somewhere else, from some web-enabled endpoint, and bring it back to the browser. The sandbox rules of the browser apply, and the only way that I can get data into the browser and into my Blazor WebAssembly application is through making a web request. And we can do that by making a request using an HTTP client to get data and return it to our Blazor WebAssembly application. If I want to get data from the server and paint it into my Blazor component, I can use an HTTP client to do that interaction. I've created a controller that will return the exact same forecast here from our weather forecast service at an API endpoint that we can take a look at real quick. So if I fetch data from API/forecast, I'll get that same set of weather forecast information. Let's wire this up with an HTTP client injected into our fetch data razor template. First, I'll go into the startup file and I'll add a service so that we can register that HTTP client for us to interact with. I'll go back over to the fetch data razor file, and now I'll inject that HTTP client that we're going to work with. Next, I'll go to the bottom of the file, and instead of the forecasts getting forecasts asynchronously from the forecast service, I'll use the HTTP client to fetch it from that API endpoint. I'll fetch my weather forecast now by specifying forecasts equals await HTTP dot get from JSON async, and I'm going to be returning an IEnumerable collection of weather forecasts from HTTP from HTTPS localhost 5001 API forecast. Now I need to change the interaction here. We're not getting an array of forecasts. We're getting an IEnumerable of those. So I'll change that. Save. And it updates on the right and shows me the exact same content. It's now fetching it using an HTTP request from the server. Now, this is a server-side application. It's using an HTTP client fetch. This is much more accurate in use if you're inside of a Blazor WebAssembly application, but you could certainly use this approach to interact with microservices that live behind the firewall, because this HTTP get from JSON async we see on line 46 is actually firing on the server, not inside the browser. In this case, because this is a Blazor server-side application. So you have the ability to work with microservices and inject HTTP clients in your Blazor pages and components to interact with those as well. Maybe you want to interact with an Azure search service or an Azure function. You can do that using this HTTP client injection technique. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoy this Blazor video. I've got a bunch more of them in the queue, and I hope you tune in to watch the next one. I want to talk to you this time about Blazor and handling events inside of our components. Now, when we saw the counter sample that comes with our Blazor templates, it had an @onClick attribute on the HTML button. Now, at the time, we just explained that away as we're handling the click event of the button and handing it off to some C# code. Well, what about other events that happen inside of our HTML elements? Can I handle those also? Like onChange and key down and key up? Can I interact with those too? Let's take a look at how we can work with the other events on our HTML elements. And let's actually go a step further and learn how we can create our own events on our components that the parent components or parent pages can listen to and interact with. Let's head over to the code. All right, here we are looking at the Blazing Pizza demo. This is a workshop. This is some other content that we make available from the .NET team that you can use to learn more about Blazor. Now, on this fictional pizza shop that we've created, we've got a collection of 8 different pizza specials on the front page here. And you see I've got 2 links across the top. I've got a menu item to get pizzas and a menu item to see what my orders are. And if I click through to my orders, I clearly navigate to the orders page. We know how to do that. We know how to navigate between pages. Those are simple anchor tags. They're a little bit different here in Blazor using something called nav links. What we really want to check into here is how to interact with each one of these specials. For example, when I click on my pepperoni special here, it opens up a pop-up window. And I can click cancel and it makes the window disappear. How do we handle that click event so that it presents the window and closes the window? Clearly, there's an onClick handler happening somewhere for both the cancel button and for my pepperoni pizza special. Let's go over to the code and take a look at where we wire up the onClick handler and how we can pass that event callback around from components to pages. Here I am in Visual Studio, and I'm looking at the source code to the index page, the front page that we saw for my Blazing Pizza website. And this is the collection of pizza cards that are formatted and placed on screen, those 8 pizza specials. It's just an unordered list with some specially formatted list items for each one of the pizzas. Check out what's happening here on line 11. We have an entry that says onClick show configure pizza dialog, and it's passing in a variable called special. That special is a pizza special. In the case of the sample we looked at previously, that pepperoni pizza special, giving our page instructions to call a method called show configure pizza dialog and pass in the pepperoni pizza special. If I scroll down, there's our show configure pizza dialog method. It receives a pizza special object, sets a configuring pizza field, and includes information about that starting special, that starting pizza special that we're configuring from. In our case, the pepperoni pizza special. It sets a default size and it allocates a collection of toppings that we'll configure when we get into our configure pizza dialog that is enabled and shown here on line 80. With that value set to true, on line 56, this if statement is now enabled, and the configure pizza dialog component will be shown. It's being passed in the pizza that we're configuring, that we specified on line 72 in our show configure pizza dialog method. And then we have 2 parameters that we're passing in, onCancel and onConfirm. These are pointing to 2 methods on this page that will be triggered from inside the configure pizza dialog component when the cancel or confirm button is pressed. And if I scroll down, there's the cancel configure pizza dialog method and the confirm configure pizza dialog method. They have a very simple signature, returning void and taking no parameters. They act on the configuring pizza appropriately or on the order as needed and hide the configure pizza dialog. Let's go over to the component and see how those two events are wired up. Here's the dialog buttons at the bottom of that configure pizza dialog. They look like pretty standard buttons. They're on lines 55 and 59, with the keywords cancel and order displayed in the middle of the button. And they have an on-click attribute on them that's being used to trigger some C# code called onCancel or onConfirm. And we can see on lines 68 and 69, there they are, they're properties inside this component, but they're properties that return a specific type called event callback. This is a way for us to create a pointer to pass around the name of a method that we want to call when this should be triggered. So we're passed into this component the name of the method from the index page. And when the on-click event happens on our buttons, whether it's the cancel button on line 55 or the order button on line 59, that method that was defined on the index page will be executed from inside this component. Very cool. Easy to see how we can use the on-click attribute to connect some interactivity from a button to click and trigger some sort of other method elsewhere in our application. What if we want to bind other interactions with our form elements? Let's go back over to the configure pizza dialog and take a look at some of those form interactions, some of those form elements that we can interact with. So here I am looking at that configure pizza dialog, and I have this size range selector here that I can use to drag, and it will reset the price and show me the size pizza that I'm selecting when I let go. That's pretty cool. It's not terribly friendly though, because when I drag, it doesn't change and show me what the price is or the size of the pizza that I'm selecting until I let go of my mouse button. And I stop at a location. How does that work? How can we make that even a little bit friendlier? Let me show you the code that drives this range selector. So here I am looking at the range selector on lines 10 through 17. And I can see that it's an input type range with a minimum and a maximum value declared. And there's an @bind attribute being passed on line 13 that's binding to the pizza size property. So what's happening behind the scenes, what Blazor is doing, is when the range value is set, it will update the pizza size property and reflect that in the span on line 15. Okay, I can follow that. But what if I want to change that so it's not when the range value is set, but maybe when the range value changes, so that as I'm dragging the range selector back and forth, it actually updates those values in real time as I move that selector back and forth. We can do that with another attribute called bind event. So this is a modifier that we can apply to the bind keyword that specifies we're going to change how the bind interaction happens. What event actually triggers the bind interaction? Instead of it being when the value is set, we're going to trigger the bind interaction when the value is input. So as the slider moves back and forth, the input value for our range type changes, and that will trigger the bind interaction. Let me recompile and rerun this, and let's take a look at how the experience has changed in our web browser. So here I am back in the browser, and I'm looking at my classic pepperoni special that I had selected and opened up. And now when I drag the slider back and forth, the value changes in my size and price indicator over here as that input value changes. Not bad. I can get a much better experience and answer questions for my customers because they can see immediately the size and price of the pizza as they're changing this, and they don't have to wait until they release the mouse button to actually see the size and price of the pizza that they're ordering. There's so much more that you can do with data binding, connecting your components to the interactions and the methods that are going on inside of your Blazor components. I want you to stick around for the rest of this series as we've got more great content to show you about how to interact with and build Blazor applications. Hey there, friends. Jeff Fritz again, and I want to talk to you about more ways that you can succeed using Blazor. And today, I want to show you about sharing data between various components and pages within your Blazor application. If we're building a component, we're used to seeing components that look like HTML tags, which means they have those attributes on them, and we can use that to pass parameters into our components. How do we use those? How do we create them and pass data into our components so that we can interact with them? Or if I've got a whole family of components that are set up, how can I pass a parameter from a top level layout or page into some component down the chain that's going to catch and interact with that component parameter? Let's take a look over in the code at how we can work with parameters and what are called cascading parameters inside of our Blazor applications. Here I am on the Blazing Pizza demo website. This is a workshop that's available that you can download from the .NET Presentations GitHub repository. Let's take a look at how pizzas can be ordered at this faux pizza shop and the components that are available and how we pass data between those components. I'm going to choose a classic pepperoni pizza here, and this modal dialog appears that allows me to set the size of the pizza, choose the toppings I'd like on the pizza, including some very interesting options here. I'll choose extra cheese. And I can place that order, and it lists the pizza that I've ordered and customized over here on the right. How do I pass data into that component, return it from that component, and interact with it? Let me head over to the code and show you a little bit further. This is the index page for that Blazing Pizza website. And you see up here at the top on lines 4 through 20, we're iterating through the collection of specials that are available to this page in that for each statement on line 8. We go through and output information about that pizza special, a description about that special, and a formatted price about it. There's an on-click statement here that has show configure pizza dialog, and we'll learn more about that in event handlers shortly. But down here on lines 50 through 53, we're referencing the configure pizza dialog, and you see what looks like parameters or attributes that are being set on that HTML tag. But as we know, configure pizza dialog is a component, not an HTML tag. So we're going to receive these attributes. We're going to take these parameters into our component and work with them. The first attribute that we have there, pizza, equals configuring pizza, is going to receive the pizza that we are configuring and allow us to edit and work with it. Let me show you the configure pizza dialog and how we receive and configure that pizza parameter. So here we are on the configure pizza dialog, and you see in my code block down there at the bottom of the screen, I have a public pizza called pizza. Now that's a pizza type called pizza that's being received as a parameter. See that parameter attribute in front of it in the square brackets? That's telling the Blazor runtime that you're going to treat this as an attribute on this component. It's going to look like an HTML attribute and pass into this property, and it has to be a public property, a pizza. We can then act on that and interact with that as though it were any other property on this component. And if I scroll down here, you'll see we have the add topping method that's going to add toppings to our pizza. You want to customize your pizza. You don't want just regular pepperoni on there. You want a couple other things. So it's going to take that pizza that was passed in and with its toppings collection, add a new pizza topping for the topping that was passed into this method. I'd like extra cheese, green peppers, onions, whatever it might be. And we also have a remove topping method that'll remove whatever topping was passed into that method from the pizza that we're working on. Hey, that's great, but what if there's configuration options that are being defined higher up, somewhere else in my application that I want to pass through all of my components so that they can be received and interacted with? This is where a cascading value and a cascading parameter come in. So over here on my main layout, I've added a cascading value on line 15 and 17. A cascading value is another component we can use in Blazor to define a parameter, and any component that's inside these tags can listen and receive that as a parameter and work with it inside the component. Here I've defined a cascading value called maximum toppings, and I've set it to the value of 3. Now you can define cascading values that are complete .NET types and pass those around all of your components, or maybe through just a subset of your components. Here, I'm going to pass that value of 3 maximum toppings through all of my Blazor components that are rendered inside the body of my application. Since my Configure Pizza dialog is rendered inside of my index page, I can receive that cascading parameter of maximum toppings on line 76. You'll see, unlike the other parameters that we have that are being passed in as attributes, as public properties, this is a protected property. I can make it public also, but by making it protected, it's not exposed as a parameter or an attribute that can be set on my tag. I've defined the property on my cascading parameter with a name equals maximum toppings. This name matches the name from my cascading value. And I've set a default value of 6 by initializing it there on the right side of the screen. Now I can use that maximum toppings when I interact with my toppings on this page. Here, where you're configuring your maximum toppings, on line 25, if the pizza toppings count is greater than or equal to the maximum number of toppings, we're going to remove the select for the list of toppings and just output the text maximum reached. So now when I run my application, it's only going to let me place 3 toppings on my pizza. This time, we're going to talk about managing state in between pages as we're navigating our application. It's one thing to be able to pass parameters between components and pages, or to fetch some information from a database and save some information into the database. But what happens when I just want to manage the state of what's in your shopping cart, or what's currently happening with the wizard of data that you're filling out? You're filling out that form and you're going through steps 1, 2, and 3, and I need to carry that state through from page to page to page, or from component to the next component to the next. How do I do that? How do I manage state across pages and components inside of a Blazor application? In this video, we're going to go over to the code and we're going to take a look at how we can do that, how we can work with, in this case, a shopping cart and pass that data back and forth between various pages as we navigate the application so that our application doesn't forget what's in your shopping cart. Let's go take a look. Here I am back in the Blazing Pizza sample application, and we've got this really neat application that lets us place orders for a pizza. So if I go and start ordering a pizza here, I'll order my pepperoni pizza. Let me add some mushrooms to that pizza. There's my order. But if I click off this page and go look at, well, what are my other orders? What did I order last time? And maybe there's some orders listed here. When I go back to my Get Pizza page, it's forgotten the order I started. How do we manage that state? How do we have some application state that we pass along from one page to the next, be able to reference and use that throughout our application? What we can do is use an injected application state using a little bit of dependency injection and a custom class that we share through our application. Let me go over to the code and show you how you can implement one using the Blazing Pizza as an example to define that pizza order that we're going to maintain as we go from page to page in the application. This is the order state class. This contains the information about the state of our cart, of the order that we're putting together with the various pizzas that we're going to be ordering and hopefully getting delivered to our home. You see it has an order property there that defines exactly what's in our order. And the order object has a collection of pizzas that belong to that. We also have the pizza that we're currently configuring, so that if you click away from the configure dialog, we can return and it still remembers the toppings and items that you wanted to configure, you wanted to customize for your pizza. Okay, this is fine, and it's got a couple methods there, so it remembers the interactions with the page. But, Jeff, how do we pass this from page to page? Where does that wire up? How does that plumbing happen inside the application? Well, we can use the existing dependency injection features of Blazor to make this object available for the currently logged in user as they work from page to page and inject it into each page or component as necessary. Let me head over to the program and show you how it's configured. So here in the WebAssembly version of Blazor, we're adding on line 17 the order state as a scoped object. In this way, there's going to be one order state created for each time that the browser is opened and interacted with this application. Since Blazor WebAssembly runs entirely within the browser, nobody else will have access to this order state object. It's persisted in memory for this user and in memory of the browser. So as they're navigating around their Blazor application, they'll get the same order state object returned to them wherever it's requested. This doesn't quite cover all the scenarios. If our user navigates away from the Blazor application, if they refresh their browser, it will forget what's in that order state object. But as they're navigating from page to page and doing our typical workflow, that order state will persist. So if we go over to our index page, you'll see on line 3 we inject the order state object with a property name of order state. In this way, we can grab that current order, we can grab that current configured pizza, and we can decide exactly how to interact with them. As that order state is updated, it will stay in memory and stay persisted so that as we navigate from page to page, our order state contains exactly what we last did with it. Let me run this application now and show you how, even though we're working with order state now on line 12, it remembers everything for our pizza as we're interacting with it. So here we are back in the Blazing Pizza application. I'll click on my pepperoni pizza I want to order, and I'll choose that I'd like some mushrooms on my pizza. Let's add that to my order. There's my order. Hey, let's go over and look at the other orders that I've placed previously. Oh, I haven't placed any previously at this Blazing Pizza. All right, let me go back and let's see if we can customize further. And there's my order, and it remembers my pepperoni pizza with mushrooms on it. All of this because I just added that injective order state, and it remembers it as I navigate from page to page. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you stick around for more of our videos. We're going to be talking about Blazor and forms and validation in our next few videos. In this Blazor 101 series, my name is Jeff Fritz, and we're going to take a look today at how you can work with forms and data. Now, input elements inside of a web page, we're used to seeing the input tag and a select tag to create combo boxes, text inputs, numeric inputs, and we send that back to a server through a post operation to interact with that data, persist it hopefully to a database, and things are good. I want to create some interaction between those so that I can capture data. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the form input elements that are available to you that come with Blazor in the box. There's some additional things that you can do there so that you can create a form, bind to a view model that you can then save to a service, to a database that will then persist your content for you. Let's go take a look over at the code and learn more about some of the cool new input elements that you can use that come with Blazor. Here I am looking at my source code for the Blazing Pizza checkout page. This is a page that's been built so we can take in information about your order and the address that we're going to deliver your pizza to. Now, we're used to seeing forms defined in HTML like they are there on line 8. Form method equals post, action equals, and some address to post our data to. Let's go take that data and send it to this server location so that it will persist it to our data store. Do some business logic on it, figure out what we want to do with our pizza, with our order, and process it from there. Well, in Blazor, we have an object, we have a tag that we can use called edit form that we prefer to use instead. You can use the HTML form tag and work with that, but we prefer to use the edit form component. Now, what edit form does is it gives us a way to load data into a model. And this model is it's a data transmission object, a DTO, that we're going to carry from our Blazor application to that other service, to that other endpoint that's going to process it. In this case, we've defined a delivery address model that we're going to use to capture the address that we're going to be sending that order information to. Okay, that makes sense. We're going to bind and interact with that delivery address. That I can follow along. And we also have a method down here, onValidSubmit. Now, onValidSubmit is an event handler. It's a method that we will trigger when this form is submitted. And we have our submit button down there on line 21. Button type equals submit. We've got some nice formatting here with a CSS class. And it has the text place order. So when this button is clicked, it's going to submit this form, and when it's submitted, it's going to perform some validations and execute place order. And if I scroll down here, there's my place order method. So my validations will take place, this will be executed, and we can go and see it's transmitted to my orders API endpoint. It gets the information about the order, and we're able to process it from there. Okay. I think these all make fantastic sense to me. Let me show you now. We have a bunch of form editor fields that you can use that are a little bit better than the HTML input and select tags for you to interact with that will, of course, give you some additional features and hook up better to our edit form component. Let me head over to the address editor component and show you some of those components that we're working with. So you see here, input text bind value, and you see it a bunch of times here for the address, for line 1, the name, the city, and if we continue scrolling down here, you'll see it's a bunch of input text fields so that we can receive those data types and interact with them. Now, in addition to being able to receive the information about the value for this model object, the address that's being rendered and presented here on this component, we're going to also be able to get some highlights and some other interactions when those fields are marked as invalid. The input text component knows how to interact with the data annotations for our address class so that we can render appropriate input types, we can render appropriate size, and we can create the appropriate validation on those fields. Let me show you the address type real quick. So here you see our data annotations for the size and validation of our address. Maximum lengths of some of these fields. Some fields are required. That's easy to follow. That's something that we can do. We know how to do this in our other .NET components that we work with. And when I look at the checkout then, coming back to here, when that address editor component is populated with the delivery address, that's set up over here and wired up to all of these fields. So we have this nice cascading interaction where the address that was passed into here is set up for these text fields. That's brought back, that delivery address is being validated, and it's the model that we're working on our edit form. And when it's validated, we're going to process appropriately how to go and save the order. Really great stuff that's going to make editing and building forms for you a lot easier. There's a handful of other components out there besides the input text. I have a link just below in the video so that you can go to the documentation and learn more about the other form fields that you can use in your Blazor applications. Welcome back to another episode in this Blazor 101 series. My name is Jeff Fritz, and today I want to talk to you about validators. Now, we saw about creating input elements so that we can create a form to capture data and persist it out to a service or a database. But before I send that data off, before it leaves the page, it'd be really nice if we provided some feedback to the folks that are interacting with our forms so that they got some validation messages. They knew if they made a mistake, maybe they forgot to fill in a required field, or they typed in something that should be a phone number, but they keyed in something that was actually an email address instead. These types of simple validation checks, how can we do that with our forms inside of Blazor? In this video, we're going to go over to our code. In fact, we're going to bring back that exact same form that we were working with to capture our pizza order information, and we're going to add some validators to that so that we can validate that folks have keyed in an address and a city and a postal code and a phone number in order for our pizza delivery folks to be able to locate and deliver their pizza. Let's go take a look. All right, here we are looking at the Blazing Pizza sample again, and we're going to take a look at exactly how the validation works on our order entry form. Now, you see here, there's the onValidSubmit method. We talked about this in a previous video. And we also have this data annotations validator down here at the bottom. This component is going to help us run through and validate any data annotations that are on our form model object, in this case, the delivery address, that we want to inspect and enforce those validations on. Let's run this application and let's take a look at what this page looks like as we're keying in and working with our delivery address and the validators that go with it. So here I am, I've ordered a pepperoni pizza and I now have my name and fields that I can key into, and some of these fields are required. Some of these fields have a maximum length. If I click place order, I immediately get this validation that has occurred, and it's enforcing that all of these fields are required. So let me go key in some values here, and I will specify exactly where I want my pizza delivered. 123 Main Street, and we'll send this to somewhere with a really long name that might be confusing to some folks, but I know exactly where it is. There we go. And region, so, oh no. So here's one of those features of my validation and my input text element. It's already revalidated. These other two revalidated and turned from a red background, a red border, to a green border, and this one, because it's too long, it's longer than 50 characters, it's still staying red, and the error message has been updated. No, let's actually send it to Springfield. And my region, well, let's make it Springfield, Ohio. My postal code, I don't know, we'll just key in at whatever postal code, and all of my validators flip immediately and indicate that things are successful. They went to green borders from red borders. Now, the presence and the color of that border is one thing. There's an accessibility issue there. However, we include the validation summary for each one of those fields so that it will show that error message in addition to putting the border color on those fields that need updating. Let me head over and show you a little bit more about how we can customize the validation message for each one of those fields and how we can add an entire validation summary to this component. Let me head back over to the code real quick. So here in the address editor component where I have all those input text elements defined, I have this validation message element defined on lines 5, 13, 21, and further below. And you can see validation message for, and it's specifying here's the field that I want you to inspect and place a message next to this input text if there's an appropriate error message that we need to display. Okay, terrific. That's one item that we can do right there. We can also include a validation summary element over on our checkout page that will include and provide a summary of all of those error messages. So let me add one right here. There it is, validation summary. And it will just include all of those messages in this one place. I'll restart the application and we'll take a look at what this looks like. So now it might be a little hard to see because it's not placed in the best location, but I not only have the error messages reported over here on the right next to those fields because of that validation message component, but I've also got the summary down here, and these are the default required messages. They might be a little bit hard to read here. If I highlight them, it makes it a little bit easier to see with the red bullet next to them. So you're going to want to place these somewhere and format them prominently so that it's easy for folks to find. Since I placed them at the bottom of the screen below the place order button, they appear down here. So you have a bunch of options for how you want to provide validation. You're interacting with the component attributes that are providing the data annotation for each one of these fields that is going to make it easier for you to set up and configure validation that works not just with this page, not just with your user interface, but it also works with Entity Framework and your model binding going into ASP.NET Core APIs. So you'll get the exact same enforcement of those requirements, whether you're working on the server side or you're working here in user interface. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoy learning a little bit more about validation. I've got some links just below the video here so that you can go and learn more about how you can do some more advanced tasks with adding additional validation, doing more complex checks and interactions with your fields. Happy coding!